All right. Got some coffee and we're back. So now I've got a harder question in regard to aggression. For us, we like to believe we are decent people, and we want to believe we're not going to ever intentionally hurt innocent people. Okay? But here's the thing, through history, ordinary decent people have participated in mass humiliation, persecution, torture, mass violence, and genocide. Again, you can ask, like, why could people be so cruel? And that's just not the case. People aren't just cruel. Ordinary people, families, workers, neighbors, professionals, soldiers, bureaucrats, normal human beings. And again, we've talked about this already in previous chapters, but we're doing it again because normal human beings can do horrific things. Ordinary people. So these are all people who might see themselves as good, moral, or decent. So, how can somebody maintain that I am a good person while they mistreat other humans? Again, we can go back to cognitive dissonance. I'm a good person. Yes, I'm harming another person, then that creates an inconsistency. So maybe we stop harming people. That's a way to take care of that. But maybe there's another psychological route here. Maybe we can change how we think about the victim. Maybe we can think about that person that we're harming as dangerous. Maybe we can say they deserved it. Okay, maybe we could say they're actually not innocent and they're not like us. They're not actually human. They are less than human. So now when we harm somebody who is truly innocent, it becomes easier to reconcile that with the fact that we believe that we are decent people. And again, this is where we get into dehumanization. And it's not only hatred or only genocide or something that only evil people do. It involves reducing the extent to which another person or group is perceived or treated as possessing fully human qualities and individuality, dignity, and moral worth. And here's where it connects to our last lecture in regard to empathy and concern and helping behavior. So, in comparison to decreasing that distance, which enhances those behaviors, what happens when psychological distance increases? So here's where we go. Dehumanization. And again, it's not the same as dislike or prejudice. Okay? Prejudice, we talked about, it's a negative attitude toward a group, usually based on stereotypes, which can lead to discrimination. And this is where we get into behavior, unequal or harmful behavior based upon somebody's membership in a group. Dehumanization, on the other hand, is when people or groups are perceived, so thought of, or treated as less than fully human. Now, it can overlap with prejudice and discrimination, but these are not identical concepts. Because you can dislike somebody and hold prejudice without stripping them of their humanity. Dehumanization goes further. This is when people's individuality disappears, the moral concern we have for them disappears. Their suffering does not matter. There's an important misconception here in that it doesn't always require consciously thinking. Okay? You don't have to consciously recognize they aren't human. It can be much more subtle than this, and that is very common here. You can think, well, they're animals. They're just savages. They're rapists and murderers. They're just disgusting. Or you can think, people like that don't feel the way we do. People like that don't live like we do. People like that don't behave like we do. So they don't deserve the same concern. Now, this matters because normally harming another person does create guilt, empathy, restraining oneself morally. But if the target of the harm becomes psychologically less human, that's when those restraints weaken. Again, if we talked about human or helping behavior, that's when, yeah, your suffering does matter to me. But when we dehumanize people, your suffering matters less. That's the contrast between those two. Here's the thing, but people generally, again, they don't wake up one morning and decide, hey, this group isn't human. The psychological distance can develop through several reinforcing processes that are gradual. And again, that's what's so insidious about these processes we talk about. They're so gradual in nature. Okay. Now, just so we're clear here, it's not always this clean. Like stage one doesn't always cause stage two, and so on and so forth. The processes can overlap and the order varies, and they can occur simultaneously and reinforce one another. They can be interrupted, they can stop and start. Just so we're clear here, it's not always this clean. But this is the framework for us to understand this process and to understand how we can move towards greater psychological distance and dehumanization. So I'm going to, and again, we're going to go through these, but categorization, okay? Us versus them. And again, categories in and of themselves, they're not inherently bad. Again, this is what our brains automatically do to understand the social world. But they start to become a problem when we start replacing, problems arise when categories start replacing person. Then we stereotype. We reduce individuality and apply characteristics to all individuals within a group. And so moral boundaries start to shift. And again, this us and them categorization, it doesn't automatically produce things like genocide, just so we're clear here. There's a lot of additional factors that are cultural, political, historical, institutional, and situational. There's a lot of other factors that make a difference here. So as we go through these, again, you can notice how a lot of the concepts that we've already studied do apply. So again, we've talked about categorization, conformity, obedience, persuasion, group norms, cognitive dissonance. And so this chapter really encompasses a lot of what we've learned in this class to this point. So let's start with this. And again, this is how we can get to genocide, and I'm going to use some examples. And if you look around us right now, you can see this occurring. And it is it is subtle and it's been slow, but it's been happening. Okay, so we do categorize people, age, profession, nationality, maybe what team they're on, political group, what school they go to, all sorts of different things. Yeah, it's useful, it simplifies our complex world, but the categories do create in-groups and out-groups. Okay, the in-group is us. Us. Out-group is them. And this can produce an in-group preference in that we are better than them. It doesn't require a long history or hatred or anything like that, but I'm going to be more apt to like whatever group that I'm a part of compared to those that I'm not. And there are some examples here I do have in these images, even in regard to, okay, we could talk about like Americans and anybody else, okay? Our heroic adventurers, our noble populace, our great religion, our glorious leaders are combating disinformation, our objective news. And then, yes, they're invaders, they're savages, they're primitive superstition, they're wicked despot, they're censorship of the truth, they're state propaganda. Again, so again, we do have a bias against those that are unlike us, and that does create psychological differences because we perceive these differences. And now the danger does become, oh, let's see here. Okay, just to add a couple more things. Okay, in regard to the in-group favoritism. So, okay, just to add a few things that enhance this. Trusting those in our group more. and empathizing those within our group more. Okay. And a language shift can actually enhance the connection here too. Okay, we can say things like, okay, three people did so and so. Okay, that's fine. But when we say they did this, we're talking about that out group. We're creating that psychological distance, and that it's they. Okay? Here's the literally, what's psychologically different between saying John did something terrible and those people are terrible? The first one, it's an individual judgment of John. The second, we're talking about a situation regarding a category of people that absorbs every person within that category. We are generalizing that behavior to every person in that category. It's like when one person does something and we don't say their name. We use a characteristic. Maybe it's their skin color, maybe it's their nationality, maybe it's their gender or sexual identity. And that's how we describe them in regard to what they have, maybe a crime they've committed. Now we're not saying they did it. Now we're generalizing it to their entire group and applying that crime to their entire group. Okay. So once we stop seeing individuals and start seeing primarily a category, that's when stereotypes become much more powerful. All right. So, yep, we're reducing people to assumptions about their group. We're not saying who this person is. Okay. Categorization, they're members of this group. Thus, we stereotype them and say, therefore, I know what they're like. And there's an outgroup homogeneity effect in that we tend to perceive members of an outgroup as more similar to one another in comparison to the people within our group. People within our group are unique and varied and individuals. That's how we perceive those in our in group. But out group, it's a they. Within our group, okay, Sarah's funny, Mike's a pain in the ass, Jen is quiet. But when we talk about their group, the out group, they're all like that. And that is important because when we individualize people, we can take their perspective. They become more complex. And there are exceptions because, again, if Mike decides to do something stupid, it's just Mike. It's not all of us. But when we stereotype people, that replaces the individual information and simplifies a person into a category. So again, maybe Mike was part of the out group, so it's not Mike anymore. It's just they. That out group did something. And here's the thing, this is where confirmation bias comes into play, and that once a stereotype exists, and again, maybe a specific group say, okay, they're drug dealers. All right? A specific group is a drug, they're all drug dealers. Then, oh my God, on the news you see somebody from that specific group getting arrested for drugs. Oh my God, see? My point exactly. I knew it. The stereotype is self-reinforcing. And again, there's an attribution here. Because if it's an in-group, again, we're going to apply or attribute their behavior to, again, them. Again, Mike does stupid things. That's just him. A bad out-group member, that's what they're like. That's a big psychological shift. And again, stereotyping itself is not dehumanization. We automatically do it, but negative stereotypes can help create conditions to psychologically distance ourselves and reduce individualization. And so when we do that, it's harder to empathize with a category than with a person who has individuality that we can actually see and take their perspective. And that's how people can create moral distancing. So, question becomes, whose suffering matters? Agree, and again, we can probably all agree, unnecessary suffering is wrong. Okay, we can't. But here's the thing when we get to this place. These people, they are different. They brought it on themselves. They shouldn't be here. They should have just followed the rules. We have to protect our people first. Okay, so people that are like me on our in group, their well-being is important. Those again in the out group, I'm not really obligated to being concerned about them. Again, in the last class, we talked about social responsibility norm and that we help people who need help, even if they can't replace or repay us. But here's the thing, it requires that we recognize that person deserves our concern. That is what's going to motivate us. So the thing is if, again, the person that needs our help is framed as, and we think of as dangerous, immoral, contaminating, undeserving, the responsibility to help those people may weaken. And again, we don't have to hate. We don't have to be rageful. We don't even have to get sadistic pleasure out of it. We just become indifferent to their suffering. That's what's important. Harm doesn't require that you literally think that somebody should suffer. Sometimes it's just enough to not necessarily care if somebody suffers. So again, going back to hostile instrumental aggression. Hostile, I want to hurt you. Instrumental, your harm helps me accomplish something. And so moral distancing can make instrumental harm easier. I don't hate them. This is something that just needs to be done. Okay, I don't hate them, but we just need to take care of the Jewish problem. I don't hate them, but we just need to take care of the immigration problem. I know I'm going to upset people on this. I know. It's okay. That's why I'm here. This should all be upsetting. If this specific lecture does not make you uncomfortable, I'm not doing my job. Or push against something that maybe you believe, I'm not doing my job. Okay. Here's the thing. Which might actually be more dangerous? Hatred or indifference? Hatred can motivate aggression and harm, sure, but the indifference can remove the barriers to harm. Looking the other way can open the gates to mass harm. And one of the most powerful ways societies create the distance is through words. What we call people can change how we think about them, and then what might actually be done to them and what we allow to be done to them. The dehumanization and dehumanizing language we use to describe people is so powerful. It can change how we represent people. It's not just descriptive, it can change how we socially perceive people. Okay? Here's an example. A family is arriving in this country versus a threat is arriving in this country. Rapists and drug dealers are arriving in this country. Yeah, same people, different frame. Words direct attention toward, again, different attributes, different emotions, different responses. We learned about framing last week. The same information can be framed differently. And if you frame the information differently, you can get a different interpretation from people. These are high stakes. Labels can emphasize individuality or humanity, or they can emphasize who is a threat, who is contaminating our society, and who is inferior. You de-individuate the target. So instead of a person having a name, instead of a person having a family or a history or emotions or goals, the person is merely one of them. And again, not every label that a person receives is dehumanization. Some people do behave irresponsibly. And yes, that they may receive a negative label as a result, but that's different from reducing an entire category to something that is subhuman. And repetition matters. When you can continually repeat labels, they become familiar. We start to just accept them as they are. They might upset people to start with, but as again, as they're repeated over and over, people are just like, yeah, yeah, that's just what they say. And you start to internalize that. It becomes part of the vocabulary. And people stop noticing how extreme that language is. So why might changing what we call a group change what we're willing to tolerate happening to them? And here's the thing, we do see this a lot of the same metaphors over and over again. And it's so ironic. And as soon as I heard it, it just sends shivers down your spine. Because I did not think we would be back here. Now, here's one. Vermin. Yeah, that was something that the Nazis called Jews. That is also something that the current administration in 2026 called political opponents. Also, the Nazis did talk about basically the contamination of the German blood by the Jews. Unfortunately, the current administration has made comments about immigrants poisoning the blood of America. Okay. Now, when we talk about this, and again, why vermin? My God. What do we do with pests? Metaphors are very powerful. We're going to exterminate them. We remove them. We get rid of them. We eradicate them. We don't try to understand them. We don't empathize with them. They are vermin. If something is contaminating something, or infecting something, or poisoning something, what do we do? We clean it. We prevent it. We treat it. We do whatever we can to literally get rid of it. Now, so harming people, and this is so it's so purposeful, guys. These words are used so purposefully. It is very strategic. And there is a psychological shift that happens from so harming people. So we're no longer talking about harming. We don't have to talk about harming people. We're talking about protecting our society, our in-group. We're framing the threat here. If the target becomes existential, it is absolutely threatening the fabric of our society and our families. Then we need extraordinary treatment to take care of us and get rid of them. And normally this would be wrong, but this is not a normal situation. We are being invaded and infected. We have seen this in propaganda, historically, ethnic conflict. We've seen this during genocides. We've seen this during war. I don't need to give you more graphic examples. You can look them up. And this is based upon a psychological mechanism. Animal comparison can deny different human qualities. Again, some portray targets as primitive, irrational, animal-like, others cold, mechanical, without emotion. So once people are described as problems rather than as people, eliminating the problem can sound very different from harming human beings. Again, we're doing something good for us. We're getting rid of a problem. That's what we do with problems. We're not harming anybody. We're getting rid of a problem. And it matters because empathy depends partly on recognizing that another person has agency and an experience. And if we don't recognize that, if we don't believe that, then we don't have to have empathy. So, yeah, we talked about empathy and that your suffering matters to me. And that's going to increase helping. But today, with dehumanization, again, we're giving less attention to the human experience of others, and that decreases empathy. Again, that doesn't mean that a person feels absolutely nothing. There's just less concern, less identification with them, less emotional response, and their suffering does not matter as much. And humans, okay, there's also this thing called selective empathy, and that we can empathize differently depending upon, okay, are you in my group or out? Do you look like me? Do you talk like me? Do you sound like me? Do we come from the same place? Do we speak the same language? Do we believe in the same God? Do you deserve my empathy? And this goes back to the in-group, out-group. If we suffer, that's a tragedy. That deserves my empathy. If they suffer, that's a consequence of their behaviors. They're just a statistic. Well, they must have deserved it. The individualization matters. It's harder to reduce somebody to a category when you know their name, when you know they have a family, when you know their story. This helps explain why personal stories can humanize people. And this does go to moral distancing. These processes reinforce each other. With outgroup categorization, that creates distance. Stereotyping decreases individuality. Dehumanizing language. Humanity becomes less important. Decreased empathy. Suffering matters less. Again, this is not inevitable. It's a feedback loop. So what normally stops most of us from hurting another person? And hopefully, guilt, morality, consequences, norms, empathy. Okay, but the thing is, okay, so let's say the empathy still weakens. So we still have another obstacle here. I'm a good person, and good people don't hurt innocent people. Okay? In this string of processes, how do we get around that? And that is moral disengagement. We want to see ourselves as good and moral and decent people. Guilt and shame and empathy should be moral brakes and stop us. Here's where Bandura comes back into play, in that people don't necessarily need to abandon morality altogether. We just have to restructure our behavior and our responsibility and the victim and the consequences. So my behavior no longer feels like I'm doing something immoral. Again, this is going back to cognitive dissonance. I am a good person, but let's see, I harmed somebody. Now, again, I could stop harming somebody, I wouldn't feel like this, but another solution is to reinterpret the harm. It was necessary based upon everything we just talked about in the previous slides. I was just following orders. Wasn't really that bad. They deserved it. Everyone else was doing it. Now, my behavior did not change, but the interpretation did. And as a result, my dissonance decreased and I can sleep at night and live with myself. So, moral disengagement encompasses specific mechanisms that allow us to conduct harmful behaviors without the usual self-condemnation. And it complements cognitive dissonance. And so Bandura's central insight is that people can participate in harm while still thinking, I'm a good person. And that's really, really so much more interesting than thinking like bad people do bad things, isn't it? So, okay. Bandura, okay, identified some of these routes. Here we go, which we just talked about. Moral justification. We're doing this for, again, we're doing this for a greater good. Harm, you reframe it as noble, necessary. Normally, violence is wrong, but in this case, okay, euphemistic labeling. Language is going to sanitize behavior. Language does a lot of heavy lifting here. So instead of describing the harm directly, okay, you can use clinical terms, sanitize terms. That increases the psychological distance. Displacement of responsibility. Again, I didn't make the decision, I was following orders. You minimize consequences. It really wasn't that harmful. Everybody participated. Nobody was really hurt. They're just exaggerating. Dehumanization. Again, they're not really humans. They do not deserve our concern. Blame the victim. They deserved this. They shouldn't have been here. It's their fault. Harm is the consequence of their behavior. It wasn't my choice to harm them. They deserved it. None of these things require the person to think I am evil and I don't care. They allow somebody to think what I'm doing is still compatible with the fact that I believe I'm a decent person. That's why this moral disengagement is so important and so powerful. And something important happens when these explanations aren't used once, but they're repeated over and over. And so at first, like, it feels kind of wrong, but later, this is necessary. And this is when we get into normalization. This is the final part of the process. Now, the gradual shift is important in that normalization doesn't mean that everybody approves. Not everybody jumps from I would never do that to extreme harm, but the boundaries kind of shift. We talked about this in the normalization of deviance, okay? The first time that again somebody calls somebody vermin or somebody again oh God, shoot somebody in the street unjustifiably or detains a kid or let's see here, go historically speaking, throws rocks through Jewish windows. Again, any of these, okay? Initially, it feels wrong. Okay, it's uncomfortable. We notice it. It's on TV. But we have to justify it, okay? It was necessary. It was necessary for this process because of whatever reason. But then it happens again and again and again. Becomes less novel. It's not as interesting. Now there's a precedent. We just start to accept it and nobody really seems bothered anymore. And the norms change. And others around us become social information. So if everybody else accepts it, maybe it's okay. Things like this have happened, and I am just horrified. And then I go out to work or I drive or go somewhere and people just they're acting like things are normal and everything's okay. And in my head, I'm like, no, nothing, guys, nothing's okay. But I look to these people and everything seems normal. And so I'm like, well, maybe everything is okay. Everyone seems okay. So maybe I should be okay too. Again, the euphemistic language happens or helps. The harm becomes procedural policy job. It's just routine. And again, after we justify it, the next act is easier to reconcile. And again, this is a gradual escalation here. Everything escalates incrementally. Again, like just like the shocks increase step by step. And we're not jumping just to a genocide and death camps, step by step by step. Gradual escalation can shift perceived boundaries. Incremental commitment to and normalization of increasingly harmful behavior, that it normalizes it. We stop paying attention. We stop being angry. And once harmful behavior becomes normative, the people that are saying, like, this isn't okay, they become the deviant ones. Or participation in the behavior becomes ordinary. It's a 180. Originally, the harm is the norm that's violated. But then what happens is refusing harm actually is what is violating the group norm. And so now we can look at what happens when we put everything we've learned together. And we'll wrap this up because this has gone on way too long. I just looked at the time. So again, not one process does not create harm. We need to categorize people and that they're all the same. Stereotype them, and so their suffering matters less. We use language to morally distance ourselves and that they are a threat and vermin, and then we use this language to decrease empathy and whatever behaviors we have to use to solve the quote unquote problem, it's necessary. I was following orders. And that makes the harm easier to justify because we've been able to morally disengage. And all around this process are concepts that we've talked about throughout this whole semester: persuasion, conformity, obedience, group norms, cognitive dissonance. All of these factors, when strategically used and within a perfect storm, can result in horrific actions and tragedies. And if you want to go to genocide, you could go to genocide as well. Now, this is the last slide. The process can be interrupted, guys. It's not inevitable. It's not. But we all have to do something. That's the thing. It's like we all have to do something. Everybody. We have to see people, not categories. People, we have to see their names, their stories. That stereotypes lose some power. We have to take their perspectives. What do you think this is like for them? We have to interact with people who are unlike us or people who are in those outgroups. This enhances cooperation, common goals, supportive norms, reduces prejudice. Stop with the us versus them and move toward we. I know that sounds cliche. We need to share our identity. Different communities need to recognize a shared identity. Erase differences. These differences can exist in a larger shared humanity. We need to hold people accountable. Enough with this moral disengagement. Everybody was responsible. I don't care what your intent was. Your people are responsible. What did you choose to do? Not what you thought was happening or anything beyond that. You did this. People have to be responsible. Counter norms of dissent. One dissenter, remember from conformity, one dissenter can reduce conformity. If somebody says that's not funny, don't call them that. We're not doing this. Now that perceived unanimity breaks in a room. Other people realize, like, okay, I'm not the only one that's uncomfortable here. Oh my God, I can say something. So the norm shifts. Then we have to be morally courageous. We do have to help, even if it's at our own cost. We have to act, even if there are social pressures that tell us to do otherwise. You don't have to be a hero. You just have to help. Maybe you have to refuse to do something. Maybe you have to report something. Maybe you have to protect somebody. Maybe you have to speak. Maybe you have to help somebody that's being targeted. Resistance is socially contagious. Again, harmful behavior that can be modeled. So can courage. So the boundaries of our moral concern can expand. And it is up to us, guys. I don't even know who's still with me at this point. It's absolutely up to us. We have to work toward to create these changes, even if it's in a small corner of the of your community. It makes a difference, I promise. And that's where I'll stop there.